US President-elect Donald Trump is sending the world into a tizzy even before he has taken center stage. In an interview with America's NBC News channel, Trump threatened to absolutely consider withdrawing the United States from NATO if member nations do not meet their financial obligations. Trump clearly stated that the alliance members have to pay their bills and demanded fair treatment of the US within the NATO. Now, Trump's reference to fairness, remember, pertains to the commitment made by NATO members to allocate at least 2% of their gross domestic product or GDP to defense spending. This pledge basically aims to ensure equitable burden sharing among the alliance members. But as of 2023, that's last year, only 11 out of the 31 NATO countries had met this target. An American withdrawal, remember, would mean direct impact on the two ongoing wars, geostrategic interests being impacted, and concerns of the alliance's future. Along with NATO, Trump also spoke about the Russia-Ukraine war and stressed on how Ukraine must get ready for lesser arms and military aid from the United States of America. Let's try and understand what Trump's statement means if and when it does happen that the US withdraws from the NATO alliance. On Global Mirror, I'm joined by Dr. Swasti Rao, foreign and defense expert, also joined by Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar. In fact, we were also expecting Mr. Oleksiy Goncharenko, Ukrainian MP, to join us, but I believe he has a personal emergency, so he will not be able to join us. Good evening and namaskar to both of you. Thank you very much for sparing the time to speak with us on Mirror Now. Dr. Swasti Rao, let me begin with you. How do you see this statement? Do you see it as a genuine threat by Donald Trump, or do you see it as Donald Trump being quintessential Trump and, giving out bizarre statements, which perhaps he would not follow in the near future?
Good evening to you, Shreya, and thank you for that question. In my opinion, this is not, among all the other bizarre and knee-jerk statements that Donald Trump is known for making, this particular statement is definitely not bizarre at all. Because if you look carefully, the issue within NATO has been that the member states have not been meeting the minimum requirements of defense spending, which has been about 2% of their respective GDPs. And here, if you look at the profile of the member states that have not been doing it, it's basically the bigger economies like Germany who have never, basically carried out that pledge. And what Donald Trump has been doing, and if in the first term, when he was president, he made it very, very clear that there are going to be no free lunches. European continent, and especially the EU, cannot really be dependent on America for its security, while at the same time deepening its defense ties with China and buying cheap gas and oil from Russia. And Donald Trump, that was the time in 2017, 2019, when he made these very, very, I would say, threatening remarks about how America should actually withdraw from NATO because NATO is not serving American interests at all. Then cut to 2022 when there was a full-fledged war, return of the Russia-Ukraine war, a conventional war on the European continent, and suddenly the European security architecture was shredded to pieces. And finally, there was a need for the Europeans to come out of this peace dividend comfort zone and get real about putting together a new defense architecture. And for that new defense architecture, they cannot do it without the support of NATO, which is very, very clear. And for that, I think it really had to be the Trump pill, and a bitter Trump pill at that, to shake them from the slumber of the peace dividend and make them commit at least 2% of their GDPs. In fact, if you go by the recent statements, Trump has been categorically clear that the NATO member states have to do far more than what they are really doing. And that would be very, very instrumental in them putting and burden sharing and actually taking stock of their own security. Back to you, Shreya.
Sure. Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar, rightly said by Dr. Swasti Rao that there are reasons for Donald Trump to be saying what he's saying. Countries like Luxembourg have been spending as little as 0.58% of their entire defense budget when it comes to the NATO alliance. And that's just one example. There are several other examples in the NATO alliance as well. But do you think with the kind of scenario that these countries are in economically, they would be able to contribute more than they are doing right now? Would they be able to fulfill the kind of expectations that Donald Trump is having from them?
Yeah, thank you, Shreya. Yes, I think definitely they would be able to, and they should be able to, because I think they have also come to realize they have had the experience from the first term of Mr. Trump. And let me, underline and emphasize this point. It's not only Trump who's saying that, these countries, the NATO members, partners, that they are freeloading, that they are not paying the due that they should be paying for ensuring their own security. It was also Obama, it is also Joe Biden. It's only that Mr. Trump has been very strident in saying that, you have to pay your share, otherwise, I'm going to withdraw. Number one, I'm certain that this is a threat, basically to force them to pay. And in that context, I would say it's an empty threat, because what does NATO do? It is not only that it is, the United States is providing security to Europe, but it also establishes the leadership of the United States in the world. And whatever you might say, that Trump
Okay.
is predictably unpredictable and he's transactional and all that sort of things. But he does not want to give up the leadership of the United States in the world. And withdrawing from NATO would mean that you are completely severing your ties with
Yeah.
with Europe. Second part that you mentioned, meaning you mentioned
Yeah, this is a
Luxembourg,
crucial
Shreya.
point,
Now,
Ambassador Sajanhar.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
one
I
quick
want to
point.
talk about the American dominance and how it gets affected if the US withdraws. Ambassador Sajanar, I'm going to come back to you. Let's also welcome Ruslan Botnik, who is joining us. He's a Ukrainian political analyst. Mr. Botnik, thank you very much for speaking with us on Mirror Now. This is a statement that has come in from Donald Trump that he's threatened to leave NATO. He's also talked about how Ukraine should get ready for a lesser military aid from the United States of America. Is there fear, is there concern as to what happens next now with the Trump presidency coming in?
Hello, colleagues. Of course, we have such a scary, such worries, but we are sure that Ukraine will be financed and support for the next year, because the Biden's administration, nowadays by administration in the United States, made a very good preparation to supply Ukraine, to support Ukraine for the next year. So it will not be the problem of the next year, but it can be a problem for the 2026, of course. But Ukrainian government is willing to change the position of the Trump. Ukrainian government is looking the way how to change this Trump approach to Ukraine, how to take Trump to our side, and how to convince him to necessity to continuation of the support for Ukraine against of Russian aggression.
I think the only time Trump will be on Ukraine's side is when he said that there's going to be a ceasefire, there's going to be end to the war. That's where he's going to be on both sides, Russia as well as Ukraine. But the fact that he's talking about leaving NATO, and that is one of the major reasons that the Russia-Ukraine war started, that's NATO membership for Ukraine, something that Ukraine still hasn't been given by the NATO member countries. But just the fact that the United States of America might be considering withdrawing from NATO, is that a big concern as to what happens next to Ukraine and its entire fight for survival right now?
Yeah, you are right, absolutely. But Ukraine is seeking not only for the NATO. Ukraine is seeking for the security guarantees at the first. Our main goal is security guarantees. But look at the South Korea or Japan or Australia. These countries are outside of NATO, but they have a very strong security guarantees from United States. And NATO is important for Ukraine, but be honest, our main goal is security guarantees, which could be done inside of NATO or outside of NATO. It doesn't matter for Ukraine. Of course, if Trump will leave NATO, it means that United States presence in Europe will go down, and the power of Russia will go up in this moment, and it will be a significant risk for Ukraine, of course.
Dr. Swasti Rao, you want to come in on this? How this moves forward really now, the Russia-Ukraine war. Donald Trump, of course, have been reiterating time and again that he will end the war. He's also asked President Volodymyr Zelensky to be ready for a cut in the aid.
Yeah, Shreya, there are a couple of things here. So I was myself in Ukraine and traveling across the entire country, trying to get a first-hand impression of what really is happening on the ground. How is the political opinion shaping up? How has been the President Zelensky's calls for first the 1991 borders and how he's sort of landed up compromising on that and now becoming more realistic, etc. So I can definitely tell you one thing, which is that contrary to what everybody expects, that Donald Trump would come and end the war in 24 hours. I mean, obviously, if you carefully see how he has been putting together his cabinet, and if you see three key appointments, one, of course, was a special envoy for Russia and Ukraine, that is Keith Kellogg. Or if you look at, the National Security Advisor or the Secretary of State, I mean, these three key appointments have been, for people who have had, I would say, if not a very pro-Ukrainian position, but definitely very strong views on Russia. And that tells us that Donald Trump isn't really having a plan to come and just stop the war like that. I think what he would do is that he would make possible to reach a position where negotiations are possible. And for that, he could actually double down aid to Ukraine to bring Russia on the table. And if Ukraine wouldn't do that, he could actually cut down aid to Ukraine to make Ukraine come on the table. So there is a lot of speculation, I understand, but we will get a clearer picture on January 20th, when Donald Trump actually takes office. So that's one part. The second part is that, as Ruslan was just saying, it's very clear in Ukraine that Ukraine will have to cede territory in order to get peace for now. Whether they do it in a way which is temporary, whether they do it in a way which is permanent, is something that a call that Ukrainian people have to take. Its president has to take, but for sure it's getting clearer by the day that territory has to be ceded for getting to a negotiation and getting to a kind of a ceasefire. But that is not going to come without some sort of guarantees. If those guarantees are coming from NATO, I think that is the most ideal case situation, best case scenario for Ukraine. But frankly, I think there are a lot of hurdles in that particular path. The other one, as Ruslan said, could be about getting more specific security guarantees, even if not NATO. But I think we will have to wait and watch. And thirdly, a related part is about, regardless of Donald Trump's threats, I agree with Ambassador Sajjanhar when he says that it's pretty much an empty threat because, everybody in Europe knows that Donald Trump might be forcing Europeans to really shoulder more responsibility and more burden share when it comes to their security, because they've been for too long being used to sort of free riding on the American resources. But Europe is too important an ally for the US to actually leave stranded in the middle of nowhere. But for the Europeans particularly, Shreya, I think only some days ago, if you look, the new defense commissioner, they have created a new post within the European Union, because European Union was always known as a geo-economic bloc. And what the Russia-Ukraine war has done is that it has enabled this transformation to become more geostrategic. And the first ever defense commissioner, who was earlier the Prime Minister of Lithuania, he has actually gone on record several times, and he has said that Europeans will need to find ways within the next year itself, which is 2025, to fund hundreds of billions of euros in extra military spending to defend against any attack from Russia by the end of the decade. So what I'm saying
is there is a lot at stake, Dr. Swasti Rao. It won't be easy for America to pull out of NATO. Just as Donald Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement last time around, it's not going to be that easy. Ambassador Sajjanhar, obviously Donald Trump is also catering to how Americans and his own voter base has been feeling this entire time, that the American taxpayers' money is going into the wars. It is not being used in the welfare of people. And that's why probably he's also making the right kind of noises, saying that, other countries need to share the burden. We are being taken advantage of. And so on and so forth. But clearly, as you were talking, that he's not as naive, perhaps, because he knows that once America gets out of NATO, the entire, geopolitical dominance that US right now enjoys will crumble, and will crumble so much so that there won't be any other taker in terms of the Western powers coming in, the European powers coming in. There won't be any strong taker such as the US.
No, you're right. Absolutely. I think that is very clear. It's as far as withdrawing from NATO, it's a good threat to make these countries pay up. But I think these countries, Shreya, have been thinking themselves that they have to Trump-proof their security. They cannot continue to depend just on the United States benevolence, the United States generosity for their security, and they have to start pitching in themselves. And I think the reality check was in February of 22. You would recall that that time Germany came out and said that they are going to spend 100 billion euros more on their defense. So I think increasingly, and the table that you showed there also, many of these countries in the vicinity of Ukraine, whether it is Poland or other countries or even the United Kingdom, all of them have their defense expenditure, which is more than 2%. You mentioned about Luxembourg or Liechtenstein or, one of these countries. I think whether they are paying 0.5% or whether they are paying 5%, it's not really going to make much of a difference to as far as NATO's capacity to withstand, to build up their own defense. I think it is the big powers that really need to come into play, whether it is Germany, whether it is France, we have to see. And I think increasingly now, maybe out of 30 plus countries, there are, I'm told, more than half of them which are already paying more than 2%. And the others will also, partly due to the threat of Mr. Trump and partly for their own, that they have to take care of their own security. Because, earlier it was that energy was coming cheap from Russia, market was being made available by China, security was being made available by the United States. So as far as European countries are concerned, they were in a very sweet spot after the Second World War. But I think those good times have ended. They also realize, and their economies might not be doing so good because of the pressures and the strains that they have been facing over the last, particularly over the last 3 years, ever since the war started. But they will have to start cutting their cloth and start putting in more money as far as defense is concerned. There is no option. And not only this, I think on the other side of the Pacific also, whether it is Japan or it is South Korea or it is Australia, all of them will also be asked to pay up more for their defenses. Yeah.
Can I also ask you, Dr. Swasti Rao, at the moment, United States, the numbers that we are playing on our screens, with the kind of breakup that the countries are spending in terms of their defense spending percentage of GDP for the NATO alliance, United States is 3.38%, which is about $967 billion as of 2024. Do you think, with the kind of sentiment that prevails in America as to, the world taking advantage of the U.S. and that the U.S. should be using its own money elsewhere inside America, do you think there is a possibility that Donald Trump might work towards cutting America's spending in the near future for NATO?
So Shreya, as far as this particular concern goes, which is about making America great again, and how does NATO spending, I mean, the US spending in NATO measures up to make America great again plans. And what you're suggesting is that the American people might want that money to go elsewhere. Now, very quickly, I think it is because of the security dominance that there is a global security order, and the global security order is very much led by the United States of America. Even though the global economic order is an order where you don't really have one country, calling the shots, and you have more of a multi polarity emerging. But the global security order is something which is clearly dominated by the United States. The United States has been in relative decline, but even right now, it is by far the most advanced military in the world and the most important military security actor in the world. And why do I say so is that it is because of that then the United States also dominates all the defense sales. So the military industrial complex, the profits that the military-industrial complex makes, the control that the American military-industrial complex has in the world today is also directly proportional to what kind of a heft and influence does America's security, spending is there in the world, So I think going by all of that, the argument is very simple, which is that most of the money that America is spending on Ukraine is also going to come back to the American military industrial complex, because in fact they are working day and night and they are still not being able to meet the demands. So there is just there's under supply and there's over demand, and the military industrial complex is just having the heyday. Because of all of that, and because the kind of jobs it's creating in America, because of all the money that is routing back to America, frankly, when you talk about the security sphere, there is really a lot of incentive which is really present in the United States. If you also look at other politicians from the Republican Party itself, I mean, leaving aside the MAGA group or leaving aside people like J.D. Vance or perhaps Elbridge Colby, scholars like them, if you leave them aside, there is a fair amount of understanding that most of the money is actually coming back and it is helping America sort of double down on its control on the world's global security order. So that alone is not so much of a problem. What is of a bigger problem, and that we have seen that Donald Trump has already given this responsibility to Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, which is to sort of prune this bureaucratic slab through a different kind of a mechanism. And I think that is where Donald Trump is going to be looking at. In terms of upping its game in the world, I think this is also a moment, and especially after what has happened in Syria, I think this is also a moment for America to sort of reclaim a lot of its power which was lost. What it means for India, of course, is a different argument, but whether for Europe, I mean, I am pretty confident in saying that I don't think Donald Trump has any plans of withdrawing from NATO.
Well, we'll have to wait and watch, Dr. Swasti Rao, how this really moves forward. Clearly, Donald Trump knows how to play to the gallery. He knows that every word that comes out of his mouth at the moment will be discussed in the entire world. And, we'll have to, of course, wait and watch how January 20th and the near future really holds and moves forward. But thank you very much to both of you, Dr. Swasti Rao and Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar. I'm also thanking Ruslan Botnick, who was on the broadcast with us, but I believe there is a planned power cut that has happened in Ukraine amid this war, and that's why he's not with us right now. But thank you very much to all three of you for joining us on Global Mirror and sharing your perspective on this statement, on this threat, in fact, that Donald Trump has given on leaving the NATO. With that, ladies and gentlemen, it's a wrap on this broadcast. News and updates continue on the other side. Thank you very much for joining us at the moment. Up next is Sneha Koshi with Beyond the Headline.